Welcome back to Briggs on Books, where I get to talk to authors from all over the world about their books, their ideas, how they got it done, how much work is it to get a book out there. How come I don't have a book out there? It's so much work, and I like to get authors on the show who've done it and been through the nightmare and the struggles of getting a book out. Look at this book right here, Talking Pictures by Joe Cocchiarelli. Not only do I have his book here, by the way, whoops, lost my whole mouse. Nobody go anywhere. Not only do I have his book, I have Joe here all the way from, I think, South Carolina. Is that right, Joe?
Correct.
Welcome on the show, Joe.
Great to meet you, Mike.
Talking Pictures. What's that book about?
Talking Pictures is a collection of short stories, each of which respectively inspired by a famous painting of Edward Hopper, who we can summarize as having documented the culture and the style of living that came to be associated with New York City between the wars, and I take a liberty with one of the paintings to extend it beyond that period into the late 90s. Yeah. But it's circumscribed by, say, around the end of World War I till the end of World War II.
Yeah. Edward Hopper, I'm not an expert.
He was a great realist. He was a great realist portrait painter, born in Nyack, New York. His home is subsequently turned into the Hopper Museum.
Right.
And each of the stories is drawn from one of the paintings, and the only imaginary character in the story is the character in the painting.
In the painting. Now,
Hopper actually appears in two.
I always say this about Edward Hopper is, I know his paintings when I see him.
Well, you said you had a copy of Nighthawks. You might want to.
Yeah, here's Nighthawk. Maybe our viewers will say, "Oh yeah, I know that painting." A lot of people don't know the author or the painter, but when you see an Edward Hopper, you always know that's Edward Hopper. So your book makes up an imaginary tale of different paintings.
Each story attempts to describe the character in the painting and the moment of angst and loneliness that character was going through, since Hopper came to be equated with the psychological experience of angst and loneliness in the urban landscape. However, you do talk a lot about process, and I do want to get to that before we ramble all over the place. Basically, this is the history of my work where I am now. I began as a editorial assistant at Garland when we were putting out the definitive edition of James Joyce's Ulysses. Because of those contacts, I ended up writing a book for Garland, which subsequently got taken over by Taylor Francis. Okay, it's called Screen Sleuths. It's a filmography. From there, I went on in my summers after teaching high school and college to write the novel that describes what the Beowulf poet did in order to write the Old English epic. That's Ghost Song. Okay. After 2020, after my bout with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I wrote a cancer journal, and it's called Still Life with Cats. I don't know if you can see that.
Still Life with Cats.
Got a great photograph of Sir Walter Raleigh waiting in the Tower of London to be decapitated by James I. It's kind of like a metaphor for the cancer experience. And at the end, when I was spent with all my earlier ideas, I had this pile of old short stories from my juvenilia dating back to the 70s. I actually had the privilege of having one of the stories that's in Talking Pictures, New York movie, being turned down by the New Yorker, even though I was protege of Christopher Lamenhaupt's. I think that name will tell you how far we go back. The book reviewer for the New York Times.
Yes. Yep.
And his mother tried to promote my work with the then literary editor, but of course, no dice, and, the story never went anywhere. However, I had been mentored by Edmund White, who you should know is probably one of the prominent modern novelists, Waiting for Elena and The Room, the Room is Empty, and a biography of Proust, etc. And I also had the good fortune of having my work mentored by Edward Albee, I guess the leading absurdist playwright of American drama in the 1960s. So to make a long story short, this pile at the end of Still Life with Cats is sitting in there, and I'm looking at it thinking, how can I rework these stories in a better context? Because while Edmund White and Albee praised the plotting, they were not thrilled with the style. So to make a long story short, I had recently read in a Dawn Powell novel called The Golden Spur, how a has-been revives her literary career by rewriting the stories from another point of view. And of course, that essentially wrote itself. Yeah. Talking Pictures, however, has also the arcane accident of being considered by a small publisher, John Colby, who said, are any of the paintings in public domain? And that's what made bells go off. And so I found that Nighthawks was doable, none of the rest. But one painting that I didn't consider, Girl at a Sewing Machine, did end up in the collection, and it becomes the first story in the collection, and it occurs before Hopper became equated with angst and loneliness. But I think that the heroine there, she personifies the kind of person that would attract Hopper in the first place before he even became obsessed with just the psychological dimensions. And little by little, that sewing machine pose becomes the story of her unhappy, jilted love affair with someone who turns out to be a priest. While she's imaginary, the priest was my grandmother's half-brother, a great-uncle, one of the most brilliant seminarians at the University of Louvain in Belgium. He began his parish work working with a doctorate in sacred theology, even though he was an extraordinary builder of public works for his parish community. And he's real Raphael Chalfie. The Triangle Shirt Factory, in which the heroine's cousin is burned to death, is real. Hopper is clearly real, and his obsession with this new lady that he met. And essentially, the story unfolds as Hopper is trying to get her to pose without emotion, and eventually they come to the realization, I won't tell you the end, that she no longer needs to work on a wedding dress for a marriage that's never going to happen, and he might be able to use it for his intended bride. But that's the most I want to tell you about.
Don't give away any more than that.
Yes. The rest, so obviously it's too bad Mr. Colby did not decide to publish the book, because he inspired the first story. I wrote it in. Oh, and my son, who is an on and off addict of Henry James, decided that we should also pay homage to Charles Dickens in it. So there is an extraordinary reference to the wedding gown to Miss Havisham's final accident in Great Expectations.
Wow.
There are lots of literary allusions throughout the stories.
This is an amazing approach to a book, Joe. It's refreshing.
Well, out of accidents come sometimes great results. Not always, but in this case, I think that if you read Girl at a Sewing Machine, you'll agree.
I agree, yes. I can't wait. I'm kind of a nerd about stuff like this. So, I'll read it, and I'll be into it. I'll be studying.
God bless you.
I'll be studying backstories and things like that, references.
Right.
Did it take you a lot of research? Did this just flow out of your head, or did you do a lot of research?
Every painting, every story corresponds to the historical period in which the paintings were executed by Hopper. Yeah. Therefore, Girl at a Sewing Machine, the aftermath of World War I, okay? And as with Sundays, the painting that depicts a very odd man, actually he's mentally disturbed, seated on the curb of 7th Avenue, and little by little, we realize that Hopper is spying on him from across the street, another tenement, as he paints this dejected person, and the story tells how he got to that point of catatonic emotional nervous breakdown.
Wow.
Okay, so that's Sundays. And of course, because of his actual involvement with people who were either killed or came back damaged from the trenches, he has, and it's great for civil rights at the time, an encounter with a black vet who becomes the source of what he thinks is going to be a solution to his problem that he can't get over his dead lover.
Yeah.
The black vet jokingly discloses to him that there's a madman in the neighborhood who's running a brothel, and he keeps an Edison spirit phone. Do you know what the Edison... This is all real.
Yeah.
Edison invented a phone through which he believed people could contact the dead. So poor Joe Sunday goes to this man Renfrew's establishment, pays the money to sit in the room where he's basically just doped with incense and funny lighting, but he believes that he's actually contacted his dead girlfriend, and at the time when he's called back to present time, the young man, also a prostitute in the brothel, comes to tell him his time is over, and he finds that the young man has an uncanny resemblance to his dead brother who died from the Spanish flu.
Wow.
Wait, it gets better. At that point, Joe decides that he's lost the woman of his dreams, but he's going to save this young man who reminds him of his brother. Trust me, whenever we start to play God, you always can be sure it never ends well. So that's so much for Sundays. Is there anything you want to ask me about that story? Because the painting is probably the quintessential Hopper example of angst and loneliness that exists. In fact, many of the people that read the story couldn't understand what was going on until I explained to them, you're delving into the psychology of somebody who's had a complete catatonic breakdown.
Yeah. Now, I know some of the Edward Hopper paintings are in public domain. Is your book illustrated?
No, there aren't. Nighthawks and Girl at a Sewing Machine and his self-photo, which appears on my cover, that's in public domain. For some reason, wherever the museum is in Chicago in the Midwest, they forgot to renew our Nighthawks, and lucky me, I alighted for the kill.
Yeah. Joe, I can't even stop you from talking. You're so fascinating. I want to go on and on. You have time for
No.
Yeah,
I want to talk to you about the stories because I think that as we progress, we'll find out, in a way, the stories recount. Everybody wants to know, how did New York become? You say to me, your children have relocated from sunny California to not very pleasant New York City. And you can see throughout the course of the history the crime spread because of the awful situation with creeps like Hoover and the rest of the Central Intelligence, the machinations of the various financiers. I think there's one name that should come to mind. He currently owns China. And of course, the Bushes are always there when big crimes are ready to be committed.
Yeah.
And from there, we get to a story about a very mixed couple. She's Ukrainian Jewish, he's Ukrainian Orthodox Catholic, and they're struggling to get out of Stalin's Russia. Now, here the real characters come. My colleague, throughout my teaching career, in fact, she got me my first job at the school where I retired, from which I retired, Brooklyn Technical High School. Her father was a great humanitarian and Zionist, and he did things like this to help people escape from the Iron Curtain. So the couple in the painting, the girl, her husband is not in the painting, and their children become the subject of the story and their difficult romance and how they're adjusting to living on Delancey Street in a view from Williamsburg Bridge. It's chock full. I mean, if you have this penchant for kosher cooking, Katz's Deli, and the dairy restaurant Ratner's is depicted in full. There's lots of references that require you brushing up on your Hebrew and Yiddish, but essentially the story unfolds how her children, her husband ends up as a doorman at the posh. Speaking of, what we lost with the Czars, à la Vieille Russie. Do you know what that it was and still is?
No.
À la Vieille Russie is one of the largest collections of Russian, artifacts and Fabergé eggs and other, treasures. And it's still there on Fifth Avenue and 59th Street under the Sherry Netherlands. But the story does and doesn't end happily. They managed to get out of the cramped apartment on Delancey Street to one of the newer projects that were being constructed under Roosevelt's, efforts. Let's say one thing he did good, the Mitchell-Lama projects. This is all real. I lived in the East Village. I knew these. In fact, I had a friend who lived in one of the apartments 60 years after the fact. And while she doesn't end well, her children's story is given in fast forward a la Gogol in The Overcoat, and you can juggle between Russian styles. Also, the husband is a nephew of Anna Akhmatova, the new style of writing poetry under Stalin, and she and her lover were basically hounded by Stalin until his death, and then she died in old age after the purges were concluded. But Anna Akhmatova is quoted extensively because her nephew thinks that he's going to be a great author too. It's quite a pipe dream. They all are in cahoots with the effort to promote The Great Gatsby. I don't know if you're aware, when Gatsby was published, it was a disaster. It was only later academies that revived it. But they feel like they're on Fitzgerald's level at some time, and they're not. They're somewhere stuck between the old time Yiddish theater and other writers who most people don't even read because of the language barrier.
Well, Joe, if people want to know more, they're going to have to get the book and read the book, because we've gone way over time. I enjoyed very much talking to you, by the way. Where can people get the book?
You can order it on Amazon currently. It's on there with all my other books. And they have to have the correct spelling. Obviously, it's just Joe Cocchiarelli, Talking Pictures. Pictures. No, we don't have time for New York Movie, The Office at Night. The Mafia, New York Movie, the FBI takes over. The Office at Night, the Mafia is making a hit on a woman who thinks she's dealing with her husband who was presumed dead. And finally, in Talking Pictures, let's say it's kind of like a ghost tale, except that it deals extensively with all the work that Larry Kramer did to denounce Fauci when he was at the height of his machinations for AIDS. As you know, Fauci went on with the Wuhan virus and got a lot more people to go along with his nefarious designs.
Joe, you're delightful.
That's Nighthawk. That would be Nighthawk.
Nighthawk. Yeah, you're delightful to talk to. The best guests, I get to just sit back and let them go, and you did that, and you entertained us for the entire time. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you're entertained, but the important thing is to take the short story form and create a new approach, whereas only the character in the title is imaginary, and everybody else there is based on either historical people I knew, or in the case I didn't know, Edison with his hoax of the spirit phone. But you can easily look it up and research it to know what life was like in the aftermath of the Trench War as we were waiting for the first atomic war.
Yes. Joe, thank you.
Things were not moving. They were not moving in a positive trajectory for mankind. He wants you to ask me some more questions.
For our viewers, don't go anywhere, because we have another author coming up right after this. Joe, I'm sorry we have to run. We are just booked back to back, but we're going to have you on again.
Sorry as it was really a thrill to get to speak with you. Thank you so much, Mike. Whatever you can do for boosting my book's popularity, but Talking Pictures is currently available, and no one will leave disappointed.
All righty. We'll be back with more authors right after this.